With a conditional loop, ahead of time, we don't know how many times the action is going to be executed. So we'll either say something like repeat until something happens. So repeat these actions and keep repeating the action over and over again until something happens. Or another way of phrasing it might be repeat as long as condition is true. So have a condition up here and keep repeating the action here, keep repeating these statements as long as the condition is true. So let's take a look at what we might have as a condition in the conditional loop. So we might start with an assignment statement that assigns a value 6 to a variable x. And then the conditional loop says repeat as long as x is less than 10 the statements in the action. So x is 6, x is less than 10, that's true. So we're going to repeat as long as that condition is true the statements here in the action. Well, it's important to make sure that we don't have an infinite loop. And what that means is that there's no way of getting out of the action that x is always less than 10. So in order to make sure that x is not always going to be less than 10, we might do something in the action of the loop like assign to x the value of x plus 1. So if x starts at 6, then it's going to become 7, and then 8, and then 9, and then 10, and then x would no longer be less than 10, and that would get us out of the loop and down to whatever comes after that in the code. So again, if you want to make sure that it's not an infinite loop, if you start x with a value, and you say you want to repeat as long as x is less than some number, then you want to increment x, in this case, for example, by 1, so that eventually x is going to be greater than or equal to 10, so the condition becomes false, and you're able to get out of the loop. Now, in some cases, the condition in a conditional loop is on the top. So let's say, for example, we assign to x a value of 16, and our loop says repeat as long as x is less than 10. Whoops, well, x isn't less than 10, x is 16. So we're not going to execute the action of the loop. So with the condition on the top, it's possible that the action will be skipped entirely. So if the condition is already false the very first time you evaluate it, then you are simply not going to execute the statements in the action at all. So that's when the condition is on the top. On the other hand, if the condition is on the bottom, then you're always going to execute the action at least once. So if we start by saying x is 16, we're going to execute these statements, whatever they are, as long as x is less than 10. Well, whoops, x is not less than 10, assuming that we didn't change it in the action. So that's going to get us out of the loop. But still, we executed these statements once. So when the condition is on the bottom, you're going to execute the statements once before you even evaluate the condition. So the action is always going to be executed at least once, regardless of what you do with x in the action. So here's a slightly more realistic condition than what we had before. We might, instead of assigning a value to x, prompt the user for a positive number, for example. So when the user types in a number, we're going to store it in x. And then our loop might say, repeat as long as x is a positive number. So we're asking the user to type in a positive number. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But we're going to prompt the user for a positive number, and we're going to keep repeating the action here as long as x is a positive number. Now notice that in the action we also prompt the user for a positive number and read that into x. So we executed this prompting for a positive number, read into x. We repeat as long as x is a positive number. We do something with it, presumably, execute these statements, and then prompt the user for another positive number and store that in x. So every time we finish the action and we go back and check to see whether x is a positive number, we're working with a new value that the user just entered. So we keep repeating this action as long as the user types in positive numbers. So notice that since the condition is on the top, the very first time the user is prompted, if the user does not type in a positive number, then we would not execute the action at all. So since the condition is on the top, it's possible that this action would get skipped entirely if the user never enters a positive number.